When I was a kid, in the late 90s and early 2000s, superheroes were really popular. Maybe not as culturally impactful as the Marvel Cinematic Universe was, but it was certainly what made the stepping stones up to it. Yes, I know I'm old by internet standards, but the fact remains, my childhood was full of superheroes. Mainly Spider-Man and Batman. I was the perfect age when Sam Raimi's Spider-Man released in 2002, and I grew up with the Dark Knight trilogy, and so on. The thing about superheroes is that they represent moral values of helping others, being altruistic, and never giving up no matter what happens. These aspects of what we might call the superhero action subgenre are the direct opposite of the elements of what make up film noir. Welcome back to Nightly Noir, where film noir is the real punk rock. Tonight we're talking about a form of fiction that runs in almost direct opposition of film noir, the superhero genre. Obviously, I'm no stranger to talking about this sort of thing, seeing as I did a video a while back talking about the noir elements of a variant of Hulk called Joe Fixit. I highly recommend checking it out, if you're at all interested. That being said, with the new James Gunn Superman film out in theaters, it got me thinking of how the original character of Superman really stands as the beacon of human aspiration and hope. He's often called a Boy Scout, or Goody Two-Shoes, that sort of thing. Those names all paint a picture of a symbol of all-consuming goodness. This isn't inherently a bad thing, just an interesting juxtaposition of other fiction. This is very evident when you compare it to the noir subgenre. But why is that exactly? That's what we're going to explore on tonight's episode of Nightly Noir. The character of Superman began in comics, specifically Action Comics, in June of 1938. He became so popular that they decided to create his own self-titled series in 1939. Here's an early copy of the original Action Comic featuring Superman. You can see how the art of the medium depicts vibrancy and color, along with Superman's amazing acts of heroism and commitment to protecting humanity. Even though Superman wasn't the first superhero to fill a kid's imagination, it became clear early on that he would become the blueprint for how superheroes should be created. In many aspects, Superman was a reaction to the beginning and the middle of World War II, and the ideal of ensuring all people were protected by something stronger than themselves. This is directly juxtaposed with how film noir was a reaction to the end of World War II. Many people had become disenfranchised with nationalism, patriotism, and the like, though in retrospect we can see how the world's culture and overall worldview shifted over the course of a few decades, and how it is reflected in pulp culture of those eras. Superman was devoid of much moral complexity in his inception. He was an alien sent to Earth as a baby, raised by two parents with strong morals, and all of that was the catalyst for him becoming the hero we all know today. His biggest complexity mainly comes from his desire to be human and to fit into human society as best he can. This comes in the form of his secret identity, Clark Kent. This is of course the trope that persists in superhero media to this day. Through his identity as Clark Kent, he can fulfill his desire to be human and engage in normal human things, which includes, but isn't limited to, having a day job, making friends, and falling in love. It's this push and pull between his life as Clark and his responsibilities as Superman that create much of the story and drama for the series. This is shown fairly well in the new movie from James Gunn, though I'd say it doesn't focus very heavily on Superman's secret identity as much as it does his morality as a hero and his unerring view that all forms of life should be protected. I mean, he saves a squirrel during a giant monster fight, for crying out loud. This version of the character is very closely aligned to the version many people were familiar with back in the 30s and 40s, and at least for me, it was a nice return to form for the hero. There have been many, and I mean many, iterations of Superman. Many of them add a layer of complexity to the character, or, in a lot of cases, make him morally ambiguous or just straight up evil. All of these versions are just different takes on the character, however. the Superman we see in NetherRealm Studios' superhero fighting game Injustice goes full-on tyrannical overlord. We see him kill other heroes, and break away from his original worldview on protecting humanity. The most recognized and recent example of this was Zack Snyder's take on the hero in Man of Steel and the subsequent Justice League films. This version of the character takes on a much darker vision. This Superman is less hopeful, more ambiguous, and even brooding, which is a pretty big departure from the original character Superman is. This change was both seen as good and bad by general audiences, but in my mind, this version of the character blurs too much with another superhero who is ironically very closely related to the Man of Steel. Of course, I'm talking about the Dark Knight himself, Batman. If Superman is a beacon of hope for all of humanity, then this next superhero is the dark, brooding stepbrother who is sort of cut from the same cloth, but not entirely. Bruce Wayne was born to Thomas and Martha Wayne. They were affluent societal members in the city of Gotham. They were tragically killed right in front of a young Bruce, and this trauma was the spark for the creation of a truly complex character, Batman. Right away, we can see from the style of these comics that Batman is a very different breed of what we would call superhero. Actually, it's fair to say that Batman is more of a vigilante rather than a superhero. His methods in many situations are much more brutal, though he doesn't outright kill anyone. He uses deception, stealth, and sometimes even psychological tricks to get the upper hand. The art in the source material is much darker, grittier, and focused on investigation a lot of the time. In fact, early on in the character's comic run, he was dubbed the world's greatest detective. Another particularly interesting detail of Batman's character is that he doesn't have any superpowers. He just trains himself to the pinnacle of human physical potential. He makes up for his lack of superpowers by utilizing a variety of gadgets, which he either designs himself or commissions for them using his comically large amount of wealth he inherited from his parents, and of course the aforementioned honed physical prowess. It isn't hard to see the noir influences regarding Batman. He started in a comic series literally called Detective Comics. He is often called a detective, many of his stories revolve around mysteries and investigations, and a lot of his iconic villains could fit into a lot of popular noir tropes. Take Poison Ivy, for example. She is the quintessential femme fatale archetype with a flowery flair. She's seductive, sensual, and has all the markings of the trope. You can also see the gangster-style motifs from the Penguin. Underground criminal organizations and corrupt politicians are all over Gotham, which is very reminiscent of classic noir themes and topics that were focused on during the peak of noir fiction. This is why I loved Matt Reeves' The Batman. The style choices Reeves used and the cinematography direction all melded together to create a very good blend of noir sensibilities combined with modern action hero movie flair. There are claustrophobic scenes, dark set pieces, quiet moments of contemplation, all points in the favor of noir. There have been several adaptations and iterations of Batman, and much like Superman, they all try to skew certain aspects of the character. One major trend for the character was straying him further away from his detective roots. More of his recent adaptations, especially in film, focused more on the action and fighting rather than investigation and contemplation. Listen, I love the Dark Knight trilogy, but let's not kid ourselves and say that Christopher Nolan's Batman was true to the original Batman's identity. I don't think Christian Bale found a single clue out of all three films. What he did do well, though, was integrating his personal life with his superhero life. We see a lot of Bruce Wayne in these films, and I believe that's a good thing. Bruce is an important part of Batman, and vice versa. Unfortunately, though, the Dark Knight trilogy is still much more action movie and has much less noir elements related to the source material. So at this point, we've covered what I would consider the two extremes in superhero fiction. We have Superman, the paragon of hope, altruism, and basically the shining example of what humanity could aspire to. Then we have Batman, the darker, suspicious, contemplative, and admittedly much more pessimistic side of what this form of media offers. But what if there was a middle ground to be found here? What if there was a hero that, in many ways, was more relatable, and filled the role of the everyman better than most other heroes at the time? Well, boys and girls, that hero does in fact exist, and his name is Peter Parker. Peter Parker, better known as Spider-Man, Webb swung onto the scene in 1962 on the pages of Amazing Fantasy, published by Marvel Comics. Spider-Man was pretty much an instant hit, and pretty soon, just like Superman, he received his own self-titled run in the following year of his debut. Just about anyone who is at all familiar with comic books or superheroes has at least heard of Spider-Man. This is true for every character we've covered in this video, but Spider-Man is perhaps even more recognizable. I mean, not every hero got a super awesome popsicle based on their likeness, right? The reason I bring this character up is 1, he's one of my favorites, and 2, there is some stuff to talk about with this character and how it relates to the noir genre. First of all, I believe it is important to point out that in terms of morality, Spider-Man sits more on the realistic side of things rather than the two extremes we discussed earlier. Peter isn't altruistic, and at first, he isn't even what we might consider a hero, sort of like Batman. We see him battle with his desire for revenge several times throughout his career. However, Spider-Man very rarely executes the same type of tactics we usually see from heroes like Batman. It isn't until we see Peter's Uncle Ben's death where we see the change into the character we're all more familiar with. Fun fact, Uncle Ben was not the original character to coin the famous phrase, "with great power comes great responsibility." It was originally Peter himself. Spider-Man appears to be a much more grounded type of character, at least in terms of the superhero genre. We see him struggle to balance his personal life as Peter with the responsibilities as your friendly neighborhood wall crawler. This element was somewhat uncommon in the genre earlier on. In Superman's case, he never really struggled that much with keeping up with his life as Clark Kent. He was fairly successful at his job, and also was super enough to get his other superhero duties done relatively quickly to where it didn't truly interfere with his personal life. Like I said before, the conflict in a lot of Superman stories is that desire to be ordinary and to fit in, which isn't exactly a moral complication, though fairly relatable in some ways. In terms of Batman, we see Bruce basically lose himself in the persona of Batman in his pursuit of justice. He rarely goes out as Bruce Wayne and is very comfortable staying secluded, unless he's out doing Batman things. The moral complexity for him comes in the form of questioning himself and deciding how far he must go in order to bring justice to the city of Gotham as Batman. This is seen as much more complex than Superman, but that's what makes them so different. With Spider-Man, there's a level of grounded complexity where we see him make decisions that we would probably have to make if we were in his web shooters. He has to decide between stopping a car robbery or being on time for his date with MJ. Spoiler warning, he's gonna be late for his date. Is he gonna be late for class or stop Rhino from causing a traffic pileup on 53rd Street? Spoilers again, he's gonna be late for class. Even though we see him choose the correct option most of the time, that just gives the moments when he chooses to be selfish that much more weight. Or in a lot of cases, we see what most of us would consider a good choice blow up in his face. This shows that in a lot of real situations, there is no correct choice, and in all seriousness, many choices are essentially deciding between the lesser of two evils. This is where we see the moral complexity, and that's where we see the influence of noir make its way into this genre. Now, it's time to address the black suit in the room. No, not that one. No, not that one either. Get out of here! Ah yes, this one. So, just like Superman and Batman, there have been a lot of versions of Spider-Man. However, Marvel took things a bit further with the idea of multiverses. This isn't exactly a new idea, even for comics, but what it gave us was a bunch of very different versions of popular Marvel characters, and Spider-Man is one of the most prolific in this area. So much so that we have several movies based around the idea, comic arcs, and video games. It's gotten so popular that there's even a word for it now, the Spider-Verse. Thanks to this, we now have a Spider-Man for basically every situation. We have Cowboy Spider-Man, Gwen Stacy as Spider-Man, Future Spider-Man, cute anime girl Spider-Man, Spider-Ham, punk rock Spider-Man, a personal favorite of mine, and of course, Noir Spider-Man. But let's call him Spider-Noir. Spider-Noir is a Spider-Man variant who got his start in 2009. He's a Spider-Man from the Great Depression era with a similar backstory to the original version of the character. Still, Spider-Man Noir is steeped in its own stylistic choices, and even though he possesses basically the same powers as the original Spider-Man, he sets himself apart in a way only a character with noir sensibilities would. With the new show coming out, I figured this would also be a good time to bring up this character as well. This version of Spider-Man is more vigilante than hero. Where have we seen this before? This Spider-Man doesn't only rely on web shooters, super strength, and superior agility. This Spider-Man is packing heat. 45 caliber pistols, to be exact, and he's not afraid to use them. He doesn't try to kill people most of the time, but he isn't opposed to killing sometimes, depending on the situation. This is in stark contrast to how the original character is. The original Spider-Man doesn't kill, though we do see him get close a few times, even in the original series. This is just another layer to how these characters can have more moral complexity, and in many cases, the difference between right and wrong is on a razor's edge. Spider-Noir exemplifies this by exploring the moral complexities of what it means to be someone in his unique position. This is best summarized by this universe's version of Peter's Uncle Ben, who tells him, if those in power can't be trusted, it's the responsibility of the people to remove them. That is such a Great Depression-era sentiment, and also not a bad way of spinning the classic quote from the original character. Not to mention how relevant that idea is in today's era, and reflects the original idea of Spider-Man and that anyone can be Spider-Man. Spiritually, I mean. We all have power in some form or another, and with that power, we have a responsibility to use it wisely. But of course, just like Noir, we're complex, and we don't always make the right decisions. The creators of Spider-Man, Batman, and even Superman understood this, and that's a big reason why these characters have stood the test of time, and we see them get reiterated, changed, and complicated. Because we do the same thing as people, and that is the real punk rock. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. Did I use this video to yap about some of my favorite superheroes? Yeah. Did it make sense to talk about it in the context of noir? You be the judge. I'd love to know your own favorite superheroes. Leave them down in the comments. If you'd like more Nightly Noir goodness, you can find me on Instagram and Blue Sky. Well, that's about all I have for this one. This has been Nightly Noir, and have a good night.